I was just sitting here trying to get some work done, but uh, somebody mentioned The Price is Right to me, um, and it made me flash back to to those days, to my childhood days, and some of the media that I consumed at around that time. And I consumed a lot of goy slop. Now it was goy slop from the late '70s and the early '80s, so it was maybe not as malignant as the goy slop that they shovel into your mouth today if you let them. But still, I watched a lot of TV. I watched a lot of crappy TV as a kid, um, um, and I also saw some movies, as you well know if you watch this channel. Uh, and I thought I would just for the next few minutes consider cross dressing as it manifested in popular culture at around that time. We're talking about roughly 1981, 1982. I'm thinking of three specific instances. Um, One of them might have been a slightly earlier than that, but I'm not sure. Um, the three things I'm going to mention are uh, the character of Klinger on the show MASH, uh, Bosom Buddies, featuring none other than Tom Hanks, and what was his other guy's name? Tim Scolari, I think. Something Scolari. It doesn't matter. And finally, the movie Tootsie, starring Dustin Hoffman. Um, when I think back now, I you know, I wonder about what was going on with those with these instances in the media of these manifestations, these characters who cross dressed. Now, in the case of Klinger on the show MASH, uh, he dressed like a woman because it was a ploy. He was trying to get kicked out of the military. He was trying to find a way that to you know um, for the military authorities to decide that he was basically that he was gay, which at that time was enough of a reason, to kick you out. You could today today if you're in the army and you dress like a woman, then they're cool with that. That's not going to help you get out of the having to fight in a war or serve in a war as as a medic, as the case was with Klinger. But uh, anyway, that was the reason why he did it. Um, he was, of course, really hideously ugly. I mean, he was not a good looking man generally, but dressed as a woman, he was not attractive at all. Um, Now the Bosom Buddies show, Buffy and Hildegard. The premise of the premise of that show is these are two young men who are looking for a place to stay in the city, and they can't afford to stay anywhere. Uh, I think that's what it is. They can't afford, um, which would definitely be believable today in New York City. In the early '80s, I think you could still, I mean, you could find little rat holes for cheap, because New York City was just a grottier sort of place, but it had, it had some neighborhoods where, it was like where the the punk rockers all hung out and stuff. They didn't have to. They weren't rich, the denizens of the CBGBs and whatnot. But anyway, the idea was that these two friends, these two guys, couldn't find anywhere to stay that they could afford, so so they had to stay in a young women's boarding house, and in order to do that, they had to pretend to be women. It was the stupidest, like the most ridiculous premise. Um, uh, I mean, not the stupidest imaginable, but I mean, it was pretty far fetched. But anyway, it was just a reason to have these two guys who I can't remember their actual names, but then when they were pretending to be women, they were Buffy and Hildegard. I remember that for some reason. I didn't watch the show that often. I just remember it, and it was, I think, the first big thing that Tom Hanks was in. And back then, Tom Hanks there was no baggage with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks was just a fun, comical, young male lead kind of guy. Just a comic actor who seemed like a nice guy. Was kind of a wise ass. Uh, and likable and relatable, and and all that. He later morphed into something very different. He became this kind of like super heroic character figure, like his Saving Private Ryan uh, self, and um, whatever some of the roles that he played later. I guess Forrest Gump, even though that was also a comic role in some ways, it was also him flexing his acting chops. And at some point along the way, Tom Hanks came to be seen as this like Philadelphia, yeah, like he played a guy dying of AIDS, who of course must be a saint, because a gay man dying of AIDS is a saint. Is just That's just we just have to. It's just axiomatic, right? Um, and so yeah, so at some point he became sort of synonymous with virtue. Um, but in his early days, he was just like his whole persona was like to be a fun uh, comic actor, young comic actor. Um, and so then, moving on to the third example, Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman. Now, the premise of this movie was that Dustin Hoffman played, and he was an actor, uh, and he wasn't getting the kind of roles that he wanted, and he was very temperamental. He was very, he was meant to be a funny character, but he was his real self. He was, he took his acting very seriously, and he was like a little too seriously, and and he couldn't, like, he was getting excluded from the kind of parts that he wanted, and so he decided he would he would become a woman, and and after he dressed as the woman, after he became a woman, uh, quote unquote, he actually was, even though he was he completely ugly. Again, it was it really stretched. Uh, um, it beggared belief that that I mean, I guess Dustin Hoffman is kind of short, so maybe he would, he could, maybe the stature thing wasn't wasn't an issue, but that he could pull off being an attractive woman, like being a woman who was seen as attractive enough to be cast in a soap opera, um, which is what happens in the movie. So all of these different parts, like I, all of these um, instances of cross dressing, they're all, in a way, I resist seeing it as social conditioning or social engineering, like trying to get us to embrace transgenderism, because they were all played for laughs, in a way that you couldn't really play. A man dressed as a woman today couldn't really be played for laughs in that way. I mean, I mean, he could. Don't get me wrong, he could, but he's not. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to laugh at a man who wants to dress as a woman, who feels more comfortable wearing women's clothing. We're supposed to see that as a completely legitimate way to exist. Um, Whereas back in the day, it was it was men. It was these guys who obviously were not women, and uh, like just watching them trying to pull off being women, like trying to talk like women, or walk or hold themselves like women, was part of the joke. So in that sense, those movies were really or those instances of media, those two TV shows in one movie. Uh, in that sense, they were really un un PC by today's standards. Now I know there was a movie called Some Like It Hot. I think that was from the early '60s, where Jack Lemmon and some other guy dressed as a woman. I think it's a Marilyn Monroe movie. I've never seen that, so that's not my wheelhouse. But I'm talking about these particular productions, uh, these particular venues, just because this was when I was alive. This was when I was a kid, and I'm just thinking now in terms of today. Um, was what role this played, what role this was meant to play, in the direction, the bizarre and perverse direction that pop culture has has taken. That culture itself, that much of culture itself has taken, or at least that our would be rulers, our thought leaders are trying to lead us down the road to this kind of culture. There are still plenty of places where normalcy persists. Uh, you just don't see it as often. You don't see normalcy manifested as often in uh, in TV shows or movies, and if you do see normalcy, it's like, ooh, there's something sinister behind it. It's sinister. It's like the movie Pleasantville, uh, where everybody, it was like Leave It to Beaver, and everybody was innocent, and then people got more and more sexualized, and it ceased to be black and white and became color. I knew I didn't even watch that movie. I knew where it was going. I knew what it was. It was not subtle at all. But that was a little later. That was in the '90s when they were really swinging into high gear with this these kinds of that kind of propaganda. You know, there's a long there's a like a long history of men dressing as women for comedic purposes. You know, Monty Python did it. Um, it's you know it was just supposed to be kind of what was his name, Benny Hill. Uh, he did it. Maybe it was especially a British thing, which wouldn't be surprising. Um, but yeah, like I wonder to what extent seeing that kind of thing in movies at all was uh, kind of in a way, even when it was just played for laughs, even when it was just broad slapstick comedy, and there was no seeming agenda behind it. Um, there was a time when that would never have been allowed during the days of what they call the Code, the Hays Code in Hollywood, where and you hear today's cultural libertines make fun of that era and talk it down. You know, where Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz had to sleep in twin beds instead of sleeping in the same bed. Uh, because we couldn't even see a man and a woman who were married in bed together. Like, yeah, that was a little extreme, but but on the whole, you know, there was something that was maintained during that period when the code was still prevalent, and then when the code came to an end, I think it was maybe 1966 or 67, sometime around there. Then all of a sudden you were seeing boobs, like it was just immediately like if there was an actress in a movie, you're going to see her boobs. Um, didn't apply to guys. You weren't going to see frontal nudity from men, but actresses, you know, including big name actresses, you know, you're going to see them nude. Uh, now, and that was considered that was progressive at around that time period. Um, so you know, and I don't know whether when Some Like It Hot, was that still in the days of the Hays Code? I should look that up. Uh, um, but in any case, you just didn't see it as often, um, if at all, if ever. Um, and now it was like in the space of a few years, it was we were seeing Klinger on MASH and uh, Hanks and Scolari on Bosom Buddies, and um, you know, and Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie, um, and so the sight of men dressing as women was not was sort of a it was becoming more visible. Then I remember a few years later. I think this was the very early '90s. It might have been 1990 or 1991. There was the movie uh, To Wong Fu, Love Julie Newmar, where macho guys like Patrick Swayze and Wesley Snipes and was there somebody else like played drag queens, like straight guys, or who knows in Hollywood if anybody's really ever like if anybody's really totally straight, but guys who are known as straight macho guys were played drag queens, and the joke that was part of the joke of the movie. That was part of, again, part of the humor of the movie. I didn't see it. Uh, had no interest in seeing it. Again, around that time, you were beginning to sense there was some obnoxious agenda going on. Whereas with these earlier manifestations, it was all just, again, like just sort of played for laughs. But uh, but but why was it being played at all? Was it just like why were we seeing it at all? Um, was it just because it was humorous? Um, you know, uh, why was it there? Why was it ever a theme? In a lot of Shakespeare plays, I shouldn't say a lot but in I think several, there are uh, female characters who pretend to be men. And I think wasn't that it's also Cyrano de Bergerac, which it's not. I know that's not Shakespeare. Uh, wasn't that also a thing there where uh, where they were men and they pretended to be men, and they got to be buddies with the men that they were secretly in love with, who didn't know they were women. So you had, in these older plays, you had women pretending to be men, and that was okay. And of course, in Shakespeare's time, it was only men on the stage, right? So a man, a woman pretending to be a man, uh, that must have been an interesting thing to try to pull off if you were a man. To if you were a man playing a female character who was pretending to be a man, I wonder how you accomplished that. But you did not have, uh, that I can think of, you did not have men in drag. You did not have men. Did not have men pretending to be women. Um, so all of this is to say, I have, and maybe if some of you are coming to if you've actually watched this video to the end, you're gonna, you might leave some mean comment like, "This is X number of minutes from my life that I'll never get back." This guy just goes on and on. There's no point. Well, I don't know. I'm trying. That's the thing. I don't have a conclusive answer. I'm trying to think of what purpose these roles, seeing these things served. Even when it was just being played for laughs, even when it was, uh, you know, not apparently, well, there was no apparent agenda that accompanied it. The fact that it was happening meant something, I think. But of course, these were still the days of the Cold War. The Cold War was still going on, so they couldn't go full bore. They couldn't go all out in an attack on normalcy in in mainstream productions. They still had to affirm uh, healthy normalcy uh, until the Cold War ended, and then, as my thesis has been before, as I've expressed it many times before, then that they turned the cannons back. The cannons that were trained on the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was dead. Now they turn them on the native population of the West. And that's why political correctness started in 1990, 1991. That's why it started at exactly that time, once the Soviet Union was either dying or totally dead.